As I see it, I have one job, and that is to get you to coffee as quickly as I possibly can. So I'm going to do my best to make that happen. There is some audience participation in this one, so I beg for a little bit of patience. There's one other thing I want to tell you. I'm going to be talking about information architecture. I do not reference natural disasters or flu viruses in this talk. So just so you know, it's not going to be as dramatic as some of the other talks that we've seen. Before we get into what a lens is, let me define information architecture for those of you who do not know or are not as familiar with it, or who just need to see my definition. IA refers to the underlying structure of a website. It's also the practice of designing such structures. And it's really that aspect of IA that I want us to focus on, or that I'll be focusing on for the next 20-ish minutes. All right, so what is a lens? A lens has several different parts. All of these are meant to aid the practicing UX designer or information architect, and I will get into these parts in more detail in a second. I started thinking about lenses a few years ago, and as I started thinking about all the different kinds of lenses, that is, the perspectives that I use to look at IA, I came up with a lot of them, like a lot of them, like 44 of them, 44 lenses, 44 different ways to look at the underlying structure of your website. And I gotta be honest with you, since I started talking about this, it's grown to 51 lenses, 51 different ways to look at your website. And honestly, I wasn't expecting that at all. I started thinking of one like navigability or whatever, and I started thinking about one, and that would lead me to another. And the whole, I cannot believe you are taking pictures of this slide. I will freaking give you this slide. So, where was I? So I started thinking about what are the different ways of looking at IA, and as I did that, I would think of another way, and there was some overlap between them, and this is the body language for overlap between lenses. And what would happen is that even though there was some overlap, both provided interesting perspectives for me. Where did this all start? Started in 1972, but we'll skip all of that part. I was doing some work for an organization called the World Bank, which some of you may be familiar with, and we were working on their public website, the navigation for their public website. This was the site way back in 2016 before we got our hands on it. And as we were working on this, I was thinking more about an article that I wrote actually 10 years ago called Principles of Information Architecture. And I had outlined 8 principles. I was such a child. Only 8 principles. And so I was like, I should update that article, and that's when I started trying to articulate all the different questions that I was asking myself as we were working on this and other projects. And what I realized is that I was making these observations about the existing information architecture. Actually, this is as close as I get to a natural disaster here. So one of the observations that I made is that the labels are ambiguous. If you can tell me the difference between research and publications, I will give you a free book. But we don't know, right? It's ambiguous. Does anyone have any idea why there are those 2 categories? Go. Those were 2 different departments at the bank. There was a publications group and a research group, and they both wanted to be in the navigation, right? Does that sound familiar? Yes, it does. All right, what else? Nothing in the navigation tells me what the World Bank does, and maybe some of you don't know what it does, and that's okay, maybe that's a good thing. But when you came to the website, you should get a sense of what it does. What do you think this website does? Just your first glimpse of it. Yeah, Norm. Something to do with climate change. There's a big freaking iceberg on there. It has nothing to do with climate change. All right, and then the last observation is that this navigation follows you wherever you go on the website, taking up that nice screen real estate at the top, but offering me no value, not helping me understand where I am in the site. Stand by. So we can make these observations, right? And we can start asking ourselves questions. All right, I don't know the difference between research and publications. Are there better words I can be using? That's a question. Can we, grok is a word that means to understand, right? So can users understand what this site is available? What does it mean? And we can ask ourselves, is there something we can do in the navigation to actually help users? All right, so we start asking ourselves these questions. So there's some of the questions, but you know what? There's a lot of questions we can ask ourselves when we're working on the underlying structure, on the navigation of a website. There are so many questions, and that's where these lenses came from. Why do we care about this? Why is this important to us? Why should we go digging into our IA like this? So I'm going to build the case for you right now, which means it's a good time to check email. But there are 3 parts to this case. So the first part is that when you have bad information architecture, scary things happen. Really scary things happen. I need to dig into that just a little bit, so please bear with me. There's a concept called pace layering. Pace layer, in the simplest way to think about this, is in any system, is composed of layers. Some of those layers move really fast, and some of those layers move real slow. This was a concept introduced by Stuart Brand, who's actually an architect, and he thought about it from a building's perspective. When you look at the decor of a building, that can change very fast. But the bones of the building can't change very quickly at all. And you can actually look at any system like that. So the same is true for our work as information architects. Instead of art and fashion, if you look at visual design or the UI layer and then work your way down to the underlying technology, some of those things move faster, change faster than others. But the truth is that between these layers is where the tension happens. When you make a change to one layer, it affects others. And you can think about this, right? If you want to make a change to the categorization scheme on your website or your product that you're working on, that has implications. If you want to make changes to the navigation, that has implications. We see those issues bubbling to the top. You can't make a change to the navigation without making a change to the UI. You with me? Coffee is really soon, I promise. All right, so that's part 1 of my argument. Part 2 is this. When we're dealing with information architecture, we're dealing with abstractions, things that are not very concrete, right? You're dealing with categories and relationships and links, things that are difficult for people to see and experience. So when we think about what are the concepts that sit underneath the World Bank, we're thinking about things like consulting and informing and researching. We're thinking about the idea of a country and a region. These are things that are difficult for people to picture. So that was part 2. IA deals with abstractions. And part 3 is this. When we're designing a structure, we're doing design. That makes sense. But by doing design, we need critique in order to make it better. Even though I'm dealing with something that's abstract, I'm still, deliberately making decisions about what it looks like and what it feels like. And in order to do that well, I need input into that process. I need people to tell me what works and what doesn't. But it's hard, okay? So here's the punchline. It's really hard for people to critique information architecture. And it's hard because it's abstract. But it's important because it has such a major impact on the work that we do. You with me? I believe you. So how did the lenses come into play? This was the proposed IA for the World Bank. And when we start thinking about this, I can ask myself questions like about the stability of the categories, right? I want categories that are very stable. Otherwise, if they change rapidly, I need to make changes to the navigation, right? And if I need to make changes to the navigation, I'm doing a lot of ripping out of content and putting it back in. So ideas like topics actually change fairly quickly. You know, the priorities of the bank change year over year. But there are other aspects of the bank that don't change as quickly. I can also look at the narrative. What story is this thing trying to tell? When we look at the previous navigation, the story it was trying to tell was what? How is the bank structured, right? That's not useful. But when we look at the new navigation, we can start to think about who they are, what they do, where they work, and even things like, what is poverty really, right? What is the mission of the bank? We can also ask ourselves more complicated or sort of nitty-gritty type questions, like if I've got something that needs to live in multiple places, how do I deal with that situation? How do I deal with the fact that a single research paper may want to live in a topic and a country? I think what's important to understand is that the lens doesn't give me the answer, but it helps me ask the right questions, right? People always get freaked out when you introduce a new tool, like, what are you taking away from me? Don't take away my spreadsheets. IAs are very possessive of their spreadsheets. I'm not taking away your spreadsheets. I'm just saying, here's a new tool, right? Another thing to add to the toolbox to help you do your jobs. My hope is that this elevates the practice, right? My hope is that it makes us even more rigorous about the work that we do. What was interesting is as I came up with this set of lenses, it let me reflect on information architecture itself and even think more deeply about what it is that I do as an IA. Believe it or not, I still identify myself as an information architecture. And it kind of blew my mind, right? It was hard for me to categorize the lenses, which I guess is ironic, but it was a useful exercise. I'm not going to go into all the categories, but one of the categories is how to classify. So everything in the middle of the card there are the different lenses that give me perspectives on how to classify information. I identified 8 of these categories, and now I have a kind of an interesting job description of what information architects do. I need to explain how the IA works. I need to figure out where content goes, how to classify it. I need to figure out how to present the navigation in a set of menus, right? That's kind of an interesting way of breaking down my work as an IA. Those categories also help me think about when something is going wrong in my project, what is really broken here? Is it the fact that I'm having trouble explaining what this abstraction really is? We're getting to the audience participation part. Are you ready? Are you ready? Yes. All right. So I know what you're thinking now. How do I get some of these lenses? I'm just kidding. That was tacky. Sorry about that. Can we see one of them work one more time? You want to see it in action? Well, I'm going to do you one better. I am now going to give out one lens to every person, almost every person. It's a big room. We have a saying in kindergartens all across America. Does anyone know what saying I am thinking of? Good one, Sid, but not quite. You get what you get, and you don't get upset. Take a card and pass the stack. You with me? Don't be looking through the cards. I will know if you look through the cards. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pass the stack to the person on the end, and they're nicely, kindly, gently going to pass the stack down the row. And we are all going to be adults and pass the cards out. And you get what you get, and? Thank you. Here we go. I'm going to hit this other side of the room shortly. Now, I do believe, emphasis on believe, think I brought enough for everyone. If you don't get one, also don't get upset. I have more that I can give to you at the coffee break. We did it. Don't worry, I have a stash of lenses at this end of the room. I was thinking very carefully about the choreography of this whole thing. You see how this works? Sorry, very back corner. I'm sure someone will be nice enough to pass lenses back to you. Guys, when I did this in Chicago, everyone got really noisy and disruptive. And I just really appreciate how calm you're all being about this. We're going to do it. Thank you. Well done. Here we go. Now, if nothing else, you can go home and you can use the phrase, you get what you get, and you don't get upset. They were putting a video of me up there the whole time. That's kind of embarrassing. I looked okay, right? You couldn't see my bald spot. Feeling a little self-conscious. All right, everyone get a lens? All right, now it's your turn. Oh, I forgot the punchline to all of this. That actually played really well in Chicago because the Queen is from Chicago. All right, so here's what we are going to do. And this is, in order to get coffee, you have to do this. I'm going to show you a website. And you're going to look at your lens. And you're going to internalize that lens. And then you're going to look at the website. And you're going to apply the lens to the website. And then we're going to go around the room and ask everyone to, I'm just kidding. I'm going to ask one person or two people to volunteer and tell me, how does your lens apply to that website? You with me? Look at your lens, feel good about it, and then I'm going to show you a website. It's a little video, so I'm just going to, and no sound, I'm just going to click through the navigation categories. Jess told this great story this morning about some people he was talking to, some executives, and they asked him what's his favorite website. And do you remember what he said? Amazon, right? Which I get why he said that. So my favorite website, and I get a similar reaction, is IMDB. This website will never win an award for visual design, but I'm sure it has settled more bar bets than any website out there. So if you're not familiar with IMDB, it's a fantastic database of movies and television shows. And you're like, who is that person in that movie? This is the site for you. So I'm going to click through the navigation categories. I haven't used this site before, so this will be an experiment that we all get to do together. Just so you know, one of the headlines, this is about Hollywood, and Hollywood is filled with shitty people. So one of the headlines in the news is a little uncomfortable, and I apologize for that one. All right, so just 2 minutes. Take a moment, look at your lens, and then watch me click through the navigation here. All right, we good? Everyone got at least some little bit of an idea? Now it's on you. If you applied your lens and feel good about sort of the question that you got to ask about that navigation, raise your hand, and I will ask you to tell me the name of the lens, the question that you had to ask, and what observation you made about that navigation. Anyone want to volunteer? This is what you need to do to get coffee. Yes, Nora, thank you. What do you got? Tell me the, stand up. Setting expectations. Giving confidence to the user about what's coming up. Great. That's fantastic. I love it. So she looked at watch list. It was setting expectations. How does the navigation set the user's expectations about what's to come? And she saw watch list and she thought, maybe I get to watch movies through this, right? And that's not what that is at all. Nor, thank you so much for sharing. As a bonus, another deck of cards that I came up with, which I will tell you about later. One more. I got one more deck I don't want to go back to America with. Avi, what do you got, man? Engineering feasibility. Hard one. So what's the key question? How difficult is this to build? Good. Right. That's great. That's great. Avi's question was, how difficult would this be to build? And imagine if you were designing this navigation for the first time, the kinds of questions that you might get from developers, like you've actually got multiple categories meshed in here. Do I need to do multiple calls to a database to populate these menus? Or notice that those mega menus were also filled with recent news items. Right? How recent are those news items? So, Avi, thank you. I'll get you a deck shortly. So I need to wrap this thing up. Thank you for participating. If you want to find out more, IA Lenses has its own Twitter account. You can also follow this bit.ly link to learn more about the lenses themselves. And please, people, you're so fast with your cameras. Are we good? Okay. No one wants to take a picture of this one. No one's like, I don't want to email that crazy dude. But if you want to reflect on your lens or talk more about it, you know I love talking about this stuff, believe it or not. I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Is that okay? My final thought. So all the projects I'm working on right now are this. We have some crazy process that users have to go through, whether it's to publish a paper because they're an academic chemist, whether it's they're trying to get into college, whether it's they're trying to get a license because they're an architect. Some crazy process that they need to go through. And over the last 20 years, we have built countless applications to support that process. Does this sound familiar? Myriad applications, myriad websites to support processes. And so every single one of my projects right now is some flavor of this. We want some unified portal, dashboard, navigation thing to pull it all together. And I'm like, you have come to the right place. Have I got a set of lenses for you? But these are all scary, hard problems, right? And you can see in the stakeholders' eyes, this is crucial for their business. We want to help people navigate all these applications. How do we do it effectively? And all I'm saying is, these are scary problems, and there's plenty of work to be done as information architects. And that is my story. Thank you very much.